besides the fact they did not want to pay the ransom, there were a cascade and ripple effect happening. That is that technically, from the time the hospital is not functioning, the plane cannot land. There is problem, with flight to land in the island of Aruba. So then you could see really that you could not have treatment taking place. All the medical records, they remain secure. They were stored in Kansas City in the United States. And that's also another point that I would like to underline. Because in one point, you're in the Caribbean, in Aruba. This is part of the Dutch kingdom. The data are held in the US when there is an emergency situation. And in 2022, it's only then that budget and resource were involved, by a Dutch company called Shipsoft to protect the island better of the hospital, regarding the hospital. So directly you see a bit, the cumbersome situation such small island can be in, being in the middle of the Netherlands, close to the United States. Very interesting also is that if you fly to Aruba from the United States, they consider it as an American territory. I had a nasty discussion once there at the airport, explaining them, no, it's not the United States, it's the Netherlands, but I could not win that one. So the specific ransomware variant of the group was not publicly available. So there is no disclosing, and this is happening a lot because I think, of course, the person working in militaries here know that better. There is a big issue regarding deterrence and possibility for such small island to be able in a way to defend themselves. So they do have group of research task force going on working there on the island. So if you look at the map, because that's what Christelle said, I don't have the screen to read, but so Aruba is close, in fact, to Venezuela. And, it sounds like not such an issue, but it can be such an issue because if you think by drone or by plane, it's 30 kilometers from the coast of Venezuela. And sadly, it's also very close to an island called St. Margarita, where the Hezbollah is being present. So there is an underneath threat that is existing for that very small island, where you imagine actually in the situation we are, things could escalate really fast with very little resource and then little possibility. So one other issue also is that when there is discussion there, we know that the Hezbollah has that presence and capability to support or sponsor an attack from Venezuela. Technically, this is not what's expected. We do not expect a direct assault type of situation on an island like Aruba, taking, hostage the whole population. But what we know what's can happening is, covert operation, cyber attack, and also a lot of problem with human trafficking going on. See, so where all the situation is more like underground and making sometimes the situation much more complex for physical security also on the island. So we have a problem of cyber security, but there is also a notion of physical security that could be for a small country. You stop me, Christelle, if I... Okay. So what we see, and that's also why we started it to work there. When we started it together, it was about resources. I'm an academic. I have a big kick looking at information overload, cognitive overload, emotional overload, information sharing. I did work with some within military project in the past. But so that was really the interest, to realize you have no resource to cope. So this is really already difficult when there are cyber attacks going on. But when we noticed is that, of course, when countries like Russia, China, and North Korea are involved, there is a greater impact. So, and you can also, most of the attribution is often linked to North Korea with the Lazarus group that is launching, many attacks on Aruba. So here it's some, more demographic, let's say, situation, because this is funny enough, when we write academic paper, we constantly are facing the same question, that is, you said it's small resources, but please give us number. And we're like, okay, it is small resource here, look at the GDP, so we found a way to also express that by number of function. And what we did, because we started to look in the protection of the critical infrastructure there in Aruba, what is very clear is that you really have multiple roles people carrying various hats. That is at the same time that they are CISO or CEO, let's say, of a hospital. I just give a fake example here. They will be in charge with a task force, or they will be the one recommending some IT security project at the airport. So there is really a lot of overlap. So if you want to think about how to survive, in a way, being a small island, having little resource and capacity, that's also very close to some SME that are facing some resource challenge and where we saw a relationship. So in terms of problematic, we had multiple research questions, which is the dual research challenge, not only in finance, but also really the problem with proxy war and risk of political conflict. And then we do not answer those questions right now. We did in more paper, but here I just want to give some idea of what we're working on. For example, how intelligent network defense mechanism can be effectively developed against cyber attack. And what we're doing exactly is that we're looking more at the tactical and operational level, operational and tactical level. So that's what we're focusing on. Because I will say that strategy, and I don't want to hurt any feelings, but in all the meetings since 15 years, I work with military, French or Dutch, whatever. Everyone talks about collaboration, strategy, military, civil cooperation. But in reality, when I see it happening, it's on the ground. It's a lot of discussion, and it's always, that much more difficult to set up those collaboration. So our colleague Paul van Venema is professor at the Dutch Defense Academy, by the way. So what we aim and what we did, we try to understand and enact network-level crises for response integration to mitigate the ripple effect. And we looked at the level of fragmentation and existing relationship that there is among the critical infrastructure on the island, right? So in terms of theoretical background, that's for the academic, we had all our definition being here. So we define critical infrastructure. We focus on the fact, and you'll see that in the slide that is to us of most interest, that they are a complex adaptive system. So we like to take that approach that's more self-organizing system that is adaptive. So I read some more publication also from some of your colleagues that was talking, of course, of the importance of agility. And that notion of agility, it's something difficult to assess and to measure. So what's also interesting is you see already on such a small place, on a small island, that you have a division between the public and the private. So the private institutions will all be on their security. They feel responsible for it. I think they have, of course, different form of financial resource than for the public sector. So you find, again, the partition public and private. And again, it's the same kind of struggle, having the public and the private collaborating with each other. Another issue, that's deterrence. So regarding deterrence, we also refer to the academic background that we're using. But what is the most important to realize is that the real capability for deterrence is not possible. So in the sense that you cannot retaliate. Let's say that if there were an attack on Aruba, the only one who could retaliate will be the Dutch kingdom, in the Netherlands, right? And they do know that. So therefore, the attribution is not happening there. That's something that you're very reluctant to do, even to share that, because you're not sure whether you will have proper protection. So this is really something difficult even to share when the attacks are happening on private company or even, on public, that will be sure, but for private company, that's a very difficult one. So then you know that you should be also able to communicate effectively to all relevant parties. And one of the positive things, but I will come back to that with the model, is that in Aruba, what we observed is that there is much more collaboration. And because they're small. And then we used an aspect, from MIS, so on minimally self-organizing, I already discussed that. But what we want to underline is that we aim also at connecting with the field of military. And from that, we adapt the fighting power model from the British Army, and we rely on the work by also two Dutch colleagues from also with military background, General Duchesne and Astor, discussing what's named the fighting power model. And we assess, using the fighting power model, the different components that are present in Aruba with lack of resource to be able to assess the situation. So we did look carefully at moral component, conceptual component, and physical component. That is, what type of resource, IT, infrastructure is present for the physical component, but also the moral component, already the level also of readiness and moral support that the habitant of the island experience, and the conceptual in terms of doctrine of how to protect the island. And I'm gonna say, it's also something with, small community that you can learn a lot, because when you focus on that notion of moral component, there's a lot of literature, Jason, that drives me crazy and drove us crazy on formal control. When you talk about cybersecurity, you're going to have formal control, technical control, and informal control. And the idea is that how do you motivate your employee to comply, to be careful, apply the rules, etc. And then what you see in the island of Aruba is that this is in a way not necessary. There is a lot of effort and compliance and energy and resource that's provided because the level of awareness is very high. So that's a very interesting also setup for, let's say more formal type of, more academic type of research regarding, let's say, compliance. Because that's not compliance, that's going to be the issue. You can see big research conducted in the US or particularly or in France, where they explain, okay, you need to punish your employee who do not comply, or you need to provide them with, a reward. That's not something that we could identify in the island, where the moral component is extremely strong. So also through the interview. So based on the model of Duchenne, we came up with that notion of unification and unity of effort. I think that's also something that will appeal more to the military side of the audience. And we try to identify it, thinking, okay, we want to work for that unity of effort, but what is the main focus? So we look at the type of cyber attack, the professional-private partnership, the technological innovation, the legislation adoption, and we consider this to be force. Like in the Newton way, that will have some push and element on our free conceptual element. Then based on that, we called it table of inertia, with that sense of inertia. This is interesting because I think it's a French trick. By inertia, we thought about the center of inertia. That means resisting push. When you play sport or judo, or you want to find your center of balance, that any new force coming to you, you're going to be stable, that you need to find stability. And knowing that we are in a very uncertain world where, in fact, agility is supposed to be required, it's also good to have a good center of inertia that provide a good balance to the free component being there. So what we did in our research is that we looked at all those elements that are there in the table. As a good academic, we always have more than we should have in terms of time, but I'm getting there. So we had some interview with the top CISO, CEO for the critical infrastructure there in Aruba. So water and energy, electricity, internet service provider, financial sector, hospital, airport, and seaport. And I have to tell for a researcher, this is heaven there, because you have access to everyone. If we want to launch such research in France or in the Netherlands, that's very difficult. You need to slice everything. You need to organize many meetings. Here it's possible to talk to everybody, you see? And in a way, so what is a weak point for such small island is also a strong point. And we can also learn, from some aspect that they are deciding. So interesting too, and of course, I think this is good for the French part, is that there is the famous island of Saint Martin that is owned by the Dutch and also by the French at the same time, and where collaboration is also sought for Aruba, Bonaire, Curaçao, for the island there. So what we looked at fragmentation, and then what we see that they were limited cross-sector collaboration, but that they were working on. But the problem is that agility, in terms of balance, is a slow adaptation to new threat. The fragmented governance structure, need times for identification and mitigation of emergent risks such as cyber attack. So this means when an issue happens, these guys end up on the phone, really almost like you will sort out a crisis in a family, and you hope somewhere the parents will show up, bringing some support to help some aspects. So you will find more elements in the paper. I don't know if it will be available, but where we have the component of the fighting power. So we looked at each of the components, in detail through our research method and research approach. And then you see what we learn is that capacity shield and that capability, because it's only when you develop capacity that you can reach capability, are not working the concerto. There is, a lack of equilibrium with the inertia, where you see the moral component is extremely strong. Resources in terms of technology, it's a bit lower, but where there is also, a problem is going to be with doctrine, because any document they want to pass, they of course need to refer to the Netherlands for a lot of elements. So contribution, so what we like to think is that we found different elements at conceptual component, moral component. We like to encourage discussion and further elaboration for other researchers and scientists to look at this element, because collaboration, decision-making, they are like can of worms. One of my American colleagues said, okay, we don't go there, and it's a can of worms. And it is a can of worms because it's very difficult to catch. Directly you have trust, you have over concept and measurement, so we try really to separate. And what we would like to also encourage is the possibility to use model from military science. That is not happening in our field. That is in MIS, we did a review, a literature review on more than 300 papers. We just published a paper in Journal of Information System Strategy. And then what we found out is there were only 4 articles that relate slightly to some capability and military model. And we do believe strongly as a field, as academic, that if we want to make a contribution, we also need, to have more exchange and therefore have more also participation and learning more about what was already designed in the military field. So finally, from an MIS perspective, it's that notion of looking at model where we can provide also resistance to technological form. And there's a lot of technology push happening in different ways. And then there is little model who looks at, okay, how can we say no, not no to technology, but stop just constantly being pushed and have no balance because of all the technology coming around, and which element and which component need to be the strongest to be able to embrace technology but not be shaken by it constantly. So, sorry for the end of the speech. Yeah.
We have time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, so thank you for your attention. Come here.
Yeah. Any questions?
Yeah. It was a bit... Alors, this time nobody can say it's my French accent that was confusing.
Yes.
So maybe I missed it, but what did cyber threat intelligence play a role at Aruba's defenses?
In what form can you elaborate?
Any kind of threat intelligence capabilities?
So the threat intel capabilities that we have now are a bit, I want to say difficult or cumbersome or challenging if you wish, because we are part of the Dutch kingdom, but legally we have a status apartis, which makes us a bit of a different bee, and not directly linked to, we have a NCSC, so that's like just the UK form to have threat intel, but there are ways to get around that. So I went asking and they're like, yeah, but legally we can't just provide you this because we have not adopted yet the GDPR or AVG in Dutch, but we have one in the pipeline. But until then, the clear answer is no. But I figured out a way. They have a national exercise. It's called EasyDoor. Very big exercise in the Dutch. They train all the sectors, and we trained together with the Dutch Central Bank under their wing. And guess what? Everybody that participates gets intel. So there are ways. You just got to be more reluctant in finding them and just not giving up. So that's how we're doing it. So yeah. So the short answer is yes. Long answer is you got to find your way.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Question?
That region is actually also a well-known hub for offshore banking, money laundering,
So coming back to that, indeed,
Maybe you want to add she's the head of the central bank of Aruba for defense, so for cyber. So yeah, that's also what's interesting in that field is there are many answers, but not all of them will be given.
Yeah. No, indeed. So the region is suffering with de-risking and debanking, of course. So that is a fact. However, as of yesterday, we just got a BBB- rating. So that is an improvement to the rating we just had as an island. And the main reason for that is because of the strong and rigid monetary policy that the central bank is upholding, keeping also the inflation at a controlled rate. So for Aruba, that's not a big issue, but in the region, there are many other sounds and cries that it is a big issue, indeed.
Does that impact the research that you're doing in the sense that the broader dynamics?
No.
Not directly. We are looking at cyber in the defensive form. So what can we do with the tools and the people we have?
And if we look at the I like to be clear on that. If we look at the defensive aspect, it's because we can do nothing in terms of offense. Yeah. And that's something sometimes I think myself cumbersome, is that we just know that all that can be done is defense. And when you have no possibility for deterrence or offense or getting back, this makes things difficult. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for the sake of time. We'll keep moving.
Thank you.
Thank you to our
Yeah.
speakers. Yes. And they'll be around. I believe I saw our second speaker walk in, maybe. If not, we will shift order. Did Morgan arrive? Morgan, would you like to go second? Or they were, okay. We are switching the order. So, our next paper we have Dr. Colloque and Professor Lange from the University of Culture. And I will turn the floor over to them.
Okay, can you please indicate how this works? The green one.
Yeah.
So hello everyone, thank you so much for coming. We have the pleasure to present today's paper that I'm co-authoring with my colleague, Professor Dr. Evelyne Lange, titled Disrupted the Parallel State, the Impact of Israel's 2024 Cyber Attacks on Hezbollah's Institutional Capacities and Public Service Provision in Lebanon. So this is a work in progress, so the paper is not yet done because, the war just came into, let's say, there's no conclusion yet. However, the military actions were stopped. So today, if you want to review the context of Lebanon, Lebanon is always a country in a post-conflict phase. So if you want to look at Lebanon and the post-conflict recovery since 1989, since the end of the Civil War. So in post-Civil War Lebanon, we had a reconstruction phase based on the Washington Consensus, where we had international organizations based on a neoliberal peace approach funding the Lebanese government. However, the Lebanese government was actually quite corrupt, and is quite corrupt, and also colluded with some of these international organizations who were actually implicated in this corruption, given that most ministers actually came from or were consultants in these international organizations. So based on that, in the reconstruction phase, either the welfare system or any other public services, such as education, defense, or any other services for that matter, hospitals, actually were not delivered within the context of state reconstruction. In this context, in this context, we had a huge gap between the efforts and actually the outcome. So a new player actually emerged here, which is Hezbollah. So Hezbollah is a militant organization designated as a terrorist organization by the international community, or by most international community, who acted actually not as a small militia, but actually became a quasi, let's say, state or a parallel state within the Lebanese Republic. So what happened is that Hezbollah, with funding from a regional force, which is Iran, came to force, and also with the support of Syria, when Syria was actually occupying Lebanon, came to force and actually started to bring about services through its institutions. So this ensured some stability in some of the post-conflict region in Lebanon, especially southern and the Bekaa region, but also established its own governance system. And at the same time, this ensured political power for the group, and also the cementation, let's say, of its military wing in Lebanon. And also, it should be noted that Hezbollah actually participated in Lebanese governments, and also in the Lebanese parliament. So this actually provided legitimacy and more credibility to this group, but that was actually on the detriment of the Lebanese state or the Lebanese Republic. So it actually violated its sovereignty. In the same context, so if you want to actually review what happened, so we saw some stability when it's, let's say, in its power force and its military wing through the delivery of public services, because it should be noted that Hezbollah has established universities, it has established schools, it has established Boy Scout Association, it has established some power stations independent from the Lebanese, let's say, energy sector, etc. So actually, it is quite a state within the state. At the same time, so what happened on the 17th and the 18th of September 2024? So you all know what happened on October 7th, and there was actually a war of attrition from October 7th till October 8th, excuse me. The October 7th attack occurred in Israel. Starting October 8th, Hezbollah commenced attacking Israel as part of its, let's say, of its backing of also another, militant and terrorist organization, Hamas. So at the same time, we have a war of attrition that commenced on October 8th against, from Hezbollah against Israel. And what happened is on the 17th and 18th of September, Israel, or the Mossad, booby-trapped the pagers and the walkie-talkies of Hezbollah members. However, what happened is that those that were attacked, whether the pagers on the 17th or the walkie-talkies on the 18th, were actually the administrative and the civil servants of Hezbollah and not its military wing members. So what happened is that the services that were provided, let's say, by Hezbollah during these, let's say, during these times or due to these actions actually stopped. The public services such as hospitals, some schools, and also the beginning of its banking sector. So, however, these issues, let's say, raise some ethical dilemmas because there's a blurring line between attacking the military and the civilian wings or the civilian members of the same group. And here we have extensive literature that commenced since 17th and 18th of September by jurists and legal experts on either international humanitarian laws, the ICC, etc., whether we should attack, let's say, services from these militant groups, because some, for instance, we have the Article 7.2 from the Convention on Conventional Weapons that talks about booby traps, and other also, let's say, legal affairs that said even though that there are some activities that fund military actions and even terrorist actions, but given that some people are actually dependent on them, we cannot attack them by some jurists, according to some interpretation. Moving forward, so what is the problem here? So, as we have explained, there's an attrition war that commenced on October 8th. We have on the 17th of September 2024, pager explosion. So pager attacks triggers explosion causing civilian casualties, approximately 3,000. And also, we need to distinguish between the two casualties. You have directly those that were impacted who held the pagers, and you have those who were close to the pagers as well. So either family members or bypassers, pedestrians, etc. Because they occurred all over the place in Lebanon and actually in Syria, given that there is a presence of Hezbollah in Syria. Before, of course, the loss of the regime. On 18th of September, we had the talkie-walkie disruption, cyber attacks, crippled communication systems of the group, and the healthcare systems down, hospitals and clinics impacted by the attack, the welfare services as well. And here, the full-scale war between Hezbollah and Israel started on the 18th of September. And then Israel commenced airstrikes on the 20th of October and the 21st of October on Hezbollah's directly, let's say, its institutions, and more specifically, its banking system, which is called Al-Qard al-Hassan. And of course, the full scale can continue. So for the cyber attacks, as we have seen, they targeted Hezbollah, the militant role as a military organization, but also targeted it as a quasi-state. So this was, let's say, a new doctrine, or let's say a new directive by Israel, as it's not it changed, let's say, its way of attacking or considering Hezbollah. This is the change from the 2006 war, where they considered it actually as a militant group. But here they said, okay, it's a state and we will attack it as a state, within a state, so which is Lebanon. So they attacked Hezbollah's social services role, affecting the services offered by Hezbollah. So we have the loss of the institutional capacities and the governance of the group, and also the civilian impact who lost their essential services. So here we need to also review the background. So this is a psychological war. This is also a war that was against, let's say, the group in order by, let's say, making them lose their public support, given that in France we say, celui qui donne ordonne, so the one who pays actually gives orders. So here, given that the social services are cut, of course the group will be losing gradually its institutional, its, let's say, its popular support. So, what can we see from a problematic perspective, or the gap? So how do cyber attacks on Hezbollah disrupt its governance and public service delivery? But also what ethical and legal challenges arise from targeting the dual use of infrastructure and cyber warfare? Because the dual role is, of course, you have the militant part and also the civil part. From a theoretical perspective, of course, we use the new institutional theory, given that from for DiMaggio and others. So because we are exploring how their institutions that were established, that were set to have a sort of stability, at least in their regions of support in post-conflict Lebanon, and they are offering public services in order to guarantee some way or form of stability, and also provide legitimacy and credibility to these organizations in order to transform it to institutions, were disrupted. Of this organization, so first of all, it's a quasi-legitimate actor, so providing services to fill governance gap, stabilizing communities and challenging state authority, which is quite inexistent. This is one. But two, also the dual role and the geopolitical complexity. So both a militant terrorist organization and a very much present service provider. Two, the regional context. So the context, it is a Iranian proxy. This is one. But two, also its involvement in the Syrian civil war. Because you know, when Hezbollah lost the war recently in Lebanon, 8 days afterwards, the Syrian regime fell quite quickly also, the domino effect. So this is also part of Israel's own defense strategy and regional interests, and also the impact on the Lebanese sovereignty as a state. Then again, we need to see the policy implications. So we see that how Hezbollah's governance raises questions about its integration into the state, but also the cyber attacks on the dual use of infrastructure. As we said, this raises actually quite ethical concerns, and as you can see, and also legal concerns. And this war, as you can see, has raised a lot of legal concerns and legal, let's say, gaps between those who saw that there's actually quite valid evidence on either genocide, booby traps, etc., on both sides, let's say, of the belligerents who are implicated in this war. And finally, we have the ethical dilemma, so lack of accountability compared to state institutions, because here, can we say that this was actually a violation against someone who is a service provider, but it is not a state or a non-recognized states or not? And two, on the digital also infrastructure, making it vulnerable to disruptions. So, as we said, this is a work in progress. So we started with a mixed method approach. So we have studied it as a case study, first of all. But also we are trying to review the document analysis or the available documentation. There's a quite little literature based on everything that is not related to legal, let's say the legal aspect of it. But we are trying also to review how, there is some literature on the MIS part as well, on the cyber attacks, but not from a managerial perspective now, or how we can review it from a public policy and public service provision perspective. So, the actual result that we have so far, first of all, the impact of Israel 2024 cyber attacks. With the first one, we have the degradation of the military and operational capabilities of the group that is quite finished. But at the same time, we have the paralysis of administrative functions and digital infrastructure of the group. Because from that time, we have the severe degradation also of its service provision, making them lose their public support. We have also the disruption of the services, which means what? Their schools are not as before. We don't have the same staff. We don't have also the same funding. We don't also have the same, let's say, energy provision, etc. on all levels. Also, especially in the areas that were controlled by the group. Then we have also the financial and economic disruption, because we have, first and foremost, many people who are actually funded by Hezbollah. They are on their payroll. This is one. They are employees. And at the same time, not just militants, but they have their radio stations, their TV stations. It is a quasi, as we said, but also at the same time, with the, let's say, the end of their banking system, so their loans, the people who have actually taken credits, the people who actually put their money in their banks, practically gone, more or less. And at the same time, we have the regional ripple effects, or the ethical consideration and long-term consequences. So regional ripple effects, Syria is out. Lebanon now is actually coming out of, let's say, the Iranian axis for now. This is from a political perspective. But at the same time, we are seeing also some people who are trying to actually get out of this framework. And also we have the ethical and the humanitarian consequences that we have already highlighted. And the long-term strategic consequences, especially in today's either Israel new doctrine of defense, and also in Lebanon's own doctrine of how he should, let's say, the country should review its own cybersecurity stance for the Lebanese army, as is. When it comes to the current contributions, and as we said, this is a work in progress, so for Israel's 2024 strategy against Hezbollah, there's a shift in its warfare. First of all, we see, so from militia to quasi-state warfare, directly we see the reconsideration of Hezbollah not as a militant group or a terrorist organization, but directly as a state. And so Hezbollah evolved from a militia to a quasi-state actor, controlling the world's economy, governance, and military. And at the same time, we have Israel adopted a strategy to target Hezbollah directly with state-like capabilities. Hezbollah governance structures. So what we see, we have it's a multi-layered organization, so it's quite an onion. So we have here the healthcare, the education, the military, the economic, policing functions. All the functions that you can imagine for a state is actually provided by the group. So Israel targeted this infrastructure to disrupt its governance and prevent recovery. So making not only the regions of its, let's say, the influence of the group, not only annihilating its institutions, but also making the regions under its control unlivable, so unlivable spaces. Also disrupting the infrastructure where Hezbollah used to exist or had influence, even though that some regions are actually controlled by the Lebanese state or the Lebanese Republic, but now they are actually unlivable spaces. Also, at the same time, you have Israel's multi-dimensional strategy. So first of all, the cyber warfare, attacks on financial transactions, communications, etc. The airstrikes, so we have the decapitation of its leadership, so by the group's leader is out, and also by his vice out. And we have also the economic disruption. And finally, from a theoretical framework and strategic outcome, the theoretical framework behind Israel's strategy is what? The first one is we have the hybrid warfare, so combining conventional, irregular cyber, and also the economic warfare. And actually, Israel's Prime Minister was quite proud of this achievement when, during the state visit to the United States, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu actually gifted President Donald Trump a golden pager as a gratitude, as an offer of gratitude. Decisive warfare, this is Clausewitz, so this is swift victory that occurred, and the gray zone conflict. Also, from a global and regional implications, we have the cyber attack disrupted Hezbollah's influence in Syria and the regional power dynamics. And we have the anti-Islamic power struggle. So also the support from Iran was challenged also by everyone and even in Lebanon who supported it. And finally, the strategic outcomes of Israel's 2024 campaign. As we have seen, the leadership decapitation, crippling governance, the public perception shift, and the successful ceasefire, where the group signed under Israeli favorable terms, and Hezbollah actually withdrew north. Finally, in conclusion, we have seen that the strategic implications behind Israel's 2024 cyber attacks on Hezbollah, we have the evolution of the cyber warfare. It's an unprecedented and never, and actually it was never, it's a predestined, actually this operation has never occurred. So this is one, they set an example. And the impact we have seen also on Hezbollah's governance, and this is a new era of hybrid warfare, very unconventional. And also we have, as we have seen, as we have stated now, the global precedent set. And finally, from the ethical and humanitarian and policy implications, so as we have seen, this war and actually this operation highlighted a lot from a legal perspective. For instance, the Lebanese government actually set out a complaint to ICC and also the the ILO, the International Labour Organization, given that these areas, let's say these attacks, actually implicated other people either in the street or their places of work from a work safety perspective. The need for international regulations, the global shift towards cyber warfare, and the policy recommendation. Thank you so much for your attention, and we remain at your disposal if you have any questions. Thank you.
We do have time for a couple questions.
I'm Unidad from the International
Please, by all means.
I would argue that we are not actually talking about cyber warfare here at all. I would say that it is normal, innovative but normal use IEDs, in a way, explosive charges that have been preset into some machines and then they are just they are made to explode remotely. So how would you counter this argument that you can't? I would say that you can't actually apply lessons from this paper to cyber warfare. What would you say to me, as a response?
Thank you so much for this question. Actually, based on what was divulgated also by, and to my concern, to my knowledge, and also to what we have read so far, and also by, let's say, ex-agents of the Mossad, also on Israeli television and also in the newspaper, they have specified that it is actually a cyber attack that they have, let's say, classified it as or categorized it as a cyber attack on the group. Maybe of course, I'm not a military expert regarding how, let's say, from an operational part, how did they executed it. But from a military perspective, and also based on what we have learned, the charges were put, or let's say replaced, by the Israeli Mossad, but by Hezbollah, and Hezbollah did not verify its content. And then when it comes, let's say the buying took place 2 to 3 years earlier, when they actually replaced using conventional phones or telephones to use pagers so they can be untracked or untraceable. And at the same time, there was, let's say, either a message or something that was sent directly by the Israeli Mossad to directly do what they did. But from a cyber, let's say, from a cyber attack, what we can state, or how I can answer you, is that based on how they categorized it, they said there is a cyber or a full-scale cyber attack. And also this was pronounced by the Israeli Prime Minister. So when they actually acknowledged that they are responsible for it. Okay, thank you.
You referred to on the link between the pager and walkie-talkie attacks and the impact on the welfare and health services. I don't see the link how this attack could stop those services.
Sure, okay, thank you for your question. Actually, those, as at the beginning of this presentation, when we directly presented what occurred, we stated that those who were directly impacted by the pager attacks were the administrative and the civil servant of Hezbollah, given that Hezbollah's military actually uses a parallel communication system. Of course, it's untrackable. It is also parallel than that of the state. So they have their own communication system, and they don't use pagers. Those who are using pagers are actually the civil servants, between brackets, of the group. So those who are actually providing these services. So we have either their doctors, we have in their hospitals, those who work in their universities, the university professors, etc. Those who work in their banks, those who work also in their energy system, etc. So when we have the staff that is out, and we have approximately 15,000 people who are either completely blind or they have lost their joints, etc., other than those who were killed, directly the group started stopping, let's say, their civil services. And also, and this is from another, let's say, perspective, the group was also under cyber attacks when it comes to their information system to provide their services, especially in their banking system by Israel, prior and after the bombing of their bank. Sir?
So what was notable about this attack for me was the degree of premeditation. Is there other evidence of similar activities engaged in by other states? Because typically we think of these as terrorist organizations leading the threat. It's rare that you see a state engage in similar types of activities.
So please, if I understand your question.
So let me rephrase it.
Please.
So what was notable about this attack was a state-sponsored attack on a terrorist group that took a long-term vision. Do we have other evidence of similar attacks being launched by states other than Israel?
Of course, we see that there are a lot of attacks that are from a cyber attack of this amplitude. It was, to our knowledge and to the existing literature, and to what we have seen so far, it was the first. So this was the first. So let's say, regarding what we have learned and what we have seen, where we see a group, let's say a state, because this is the first time that a state fights a group as a state. given that Israel learned its lessons in 2006, when it actually did not achieve any of its targets for the war of 2006. So when not achieving means this is a loss, and more or less from maybe, of course, the military expertise can correct me, if you don't achieve it, so this is more or less a loss in all your investment in this war. However, so they spent approximately 28 years planning, reviewing, decapitating also all of its military leaders, decapitating also all of its civil, let's say, also its civil, let's say, servants. For instance, they also, in the last days of the war, they also destroyed their television station. They also assassinated the media personnel of the group, targeting everyone. So it was actually the first time that they also stated that in their doctrine that we are now considering Hezbollah as a state and not as a terrorist group, and we will fight it as such.
So do you think this signals a new phase of cyber war?
Oh yes, of course, because they set an example. So this is the first. So of course, and there's no going back now. And also, given their regional interest, the fact that they have divulgated some of what they were doing or what they were planning means that now their adversaries will come prepared now, whether Iran, whether the other allies, the proxies, etc. So of course now they will be prepared because now they know that we are attacked. We have this sort of attack. They have divulgated it, and also there were some even of the ex-director of the Mossad actually criticized Israel for actually divulgating let's say an operation of this amplitude, and actually said it was not the time because if we have maybe launched it before, let's say, or directly on the 8th and not on the 7th, it would have actually saved us a lot of time, a lot of casualties, and a lot of also the money that was spent in this war. Thank you.
How much time do we have together for Chris? Or do we need to cut it?
We need to get it.
Okay, so sorry,
Because we've got something like.
let's take questions after.
Okay.
Something
Okay.
like less than 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sorry.
Thank you.
We want to make sure we have time for our final speaker today, Morgan Lucas, who I believe, if my French is correct, is the General Director of the Army.
Sorry.
The General Director of the Army. Or you can correct me.
It's
with your
okay.
portfolio.
Actually, my name is Morgane, and I'm posted at I don't know the translation actually for this Délégation Générale, Direction Générale de l'Armement. Maybe it speaks to you. Sorry. Procurement Agency. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. And I'm very pleased to where is the click? Oh. So, I'm very pleased to present this work in progress on governance of satellite constellations in the security and defense sector. No, it's not this one. I'm sure you all eagerly followed the Starship launches and Iron 6 launches as well, which one was a failure and another one a success. I enjoy this moment, sorry. and what's interesting here is that many media, ordinarily more public opinion media rather than military or other specialist magazines, talked a lot about this event. This is a way to underline the importance of satellite constellations in both our daily life, but also in geopolitical context and military stakes. Maybe you were less aware about Thales' success on a new modem to interface civilian satellites with military ones. So this modem secures the communications between civilian satellites, commercial ones, and military ones. It can seem benign, but it's of a greater impact. So my research explores how a polycentric governance approach can enhance resilience, flexibility, and coordination among key military, governmental, and also private actors in the satellite constellations governance. From a problematic point of view, we obviously in a handful of recent few years, satellite constellations have swiftly become, as I said before, critical infrastructure for strategic operation. Clearly, the ever-increasing reliance on satellite data and AI-driven decision-making poses new organizational challenges to our military organization. So my research examines sorry, it's my first speech. It's not easy for me. How polycentric governance can improve military satellite constellations governance? What role AI can and does effectively play in decision-making and governance processes? And finally, which strategies can enhance interoperability while maintaining cybersecurity and national sovereignty in these fields? From a theoretical framework point of view, this research is anchored in 3 key theoretical frameworks. First framework is Ostrom's comments on polycentric governance theory for distributed and decentralized multi-actor coordination innovative mechanisms. Second framework will be knowledge management for secure data sharing and decision-making and robust decision-making processes. And third framework, finally, is Davis's and Venkatesh's technology acceptance models for AI adoption and trust within military organizations, considering military organizations have very specific issues regarding trust and transparency, obviously. This is the knowledge management framework and the technology one, linked by the algorithm governmentality theory as well. This research also follows grounded theory approach, combining extensive documentary analysis from institutional sources and also military reports, as I can access those information in the limit of their confidentiality, obviously. Direct observation as well from my post. And also qualitative interviews of satellite operators, academics, buyers as well, ministry bias, and obviously military decision makers. I will also use inductive coding and content analysis using in vivo to identify emergent governance patterns. As I mentioned, it's a work in progress, so the encoding is still pending, but early insights already suggest a need for a new kind of hybrid governance models, balancing centralized command structures with flexible coordination mechanism, as we see that the traditional hierarchical governance models struggle to address the complexity of such unique, dynamic and distributed environmental space. The first insights also suggest that AI can support decision anticipatory, but that trust and transparency obviously are critical for adoption. And then, and it's a very difficult issue from a military point of view, that security and operational efficiency requires strengthening data interoperability between space agencies, industries, and military. And this point is very tricky from a military point of view. So this research aims to provide strategic recommendations for enhanced governance models tailored to space-related military operations. And it also aims to provide, to contribute to the command theory, which I'm sure you know are more focused on natural resources, and this way of studying command theory from information system point of view, it would be a specific contribution to the command theory. And as a conclusion, and yes, proposal of a polycentric governance model adapted to not only satellite constellation, but also to spatial information system, because we see that it's not no more only about satellite constellations, but also multi-orbital systems, and even HAPS, if you know what I'm talking about, you know, the Chinese balloon. And all these systems forming kind of what I call skin data space as a common, connecting the planet, including military and civilians. Also, the recommendation for enhanced interoperability among the key stakeholders, strengthening anticipatory capabilities and cyber security to mitigate system vulnerabilities, and advancing AI integration and autonomous system in satellite constellation governance. As a conclusion, once the code completed, hopefully, we will confirm that managing satellite constellations requires rethinking traditional organizational frameworks, that polycentric governance could enhance resilience and decision-making in space defense, and that would be a radical transformation for military organizations which are more familiar with monocentric type of organizations. And so that future research should explore the long-term operational and organizational impacts of these transformations. Thank you for your attention.